So our focus today is really kind of diving into communication with our plants, understanding what our plants are telling us. So there are certain things that we can find out, certain needs that our plants have that we can tell just by looking at those leaves. And even though these illustrations that we're going to be looking at today are for basically generic leaves, this is something that is kind of across the board. Plants are always going to act a similar way when they need certain things. So to start off, one of the things we talked about in the series so far, we've talked about regrowing plants from our groceries, like things we buy at the grocery store, regrowing those. We've talked about how to fertilize our plants using supplies we already have in the kitchen. We've talked about natural pest control, again, using supplies we generally have. We've talked about, last month, we talked about preserving and drying our herbs that we grow. And so again, today we're just going to kind of focus on how to tell when our plants need certain things, right? And so to start off, we're just going to kind of go through some of these issues, I guess, or needs. And the first one is nitrogen. Sometimes our plants need nitrogen. There are certain plants, certain garden plants, certain vegetables, herbs that need very acidic soil. And so it's hard to tell which plants maybe need that. There are certain indicators, right? Now, if our plant needs nitrogen, one easy solution, and I know we've talked about this in previous weeks, but one easy solution is to add coffee grounds to our soil. You don't have to use fresh coffee grounds. After you have your cup of coffee, just take those used grounds and mix it in with the soil, and that's perfect. It helps bring that acidity to the soil. There are certain plants that need a lot more than others, and those are going to be plants like ginger root, that needs very acidic soil. It's going to be things like mushrooms. If we're regrowing mushrooms, they like a lot of acid in their soil, a very acidic soil. It'll be things like tomatoes, cabbage, even blueberries. Those are typically plants that need a lot of nitrogen. And so one of the indicators, some of the indicators that we can look for when it comes to knowing if our plants need more nitrogen is that taking a look at the leaves. Now, again, I just want to point out the leaves that we're looking at today are very generic leaves, but these are indicators that we see across plants in a variety of leaves. So it's kind of a go-to to look for. And so some of the indicators when it comes to knowing if our plant needs more nitrogen is looking at the leaf and noticing if it's yellow or like a pale green. It'll start losing that color. Another indicator is seeing a stunted growth. So we're getting a smaller plant, smaller leaves than before. So for example, if we ate a tomato, we saved the seeds, we planted the seeds, we're growing a tomato plant again, but our tomato is kind of small. The leaves aren't really growing. It's a smaller plant than it was before. That's a good indicator that it needs some more nitrogen. And so adding those coffee grounds will help kind of combat that. Will give more nitrogen to that soil. Right? And you can see by the illustration, it's just a simple drawing, but you'll notice that the yellow and that pale green are kind of an all over thing. And this is important because as we go through some of these different leaves, you'll notice that they kind of show up, the same colors come up, but they come up in different ways. And so with nitrogen, needing more nitrogen, you'll see that kind of yellowing or like pale green that's kind of all over. Right? The next one I want to talk about is calcium. So there are a lot of plants that need extra calcium, a lot of plants. An easy way to add calcium to the soil is through eggshells. And I know this is something that we did talk about a couple weeks ago when we were talking about fertilizing. But eggshells are a very easy way to add calcium to the soil. Now, there are a lot of plants that need extra calcium. It's always a good rule of thumb to save your eggshells. So typically what I do is once I crack that shell, I'll rinse it out and let it dry. And then I'll stick it in like a Ziploc bag and use a rolling pin or a pickle jar. I use a pickle jar often to kind of crush up those shells. You want to make them as small as you can. So if you are doing a mortar and pestle, that works well, or just keeping them in that Ziploc bag and rolling that rolling pin over it quite a bit will kind of grind it up. And then you can just add that to your soil, mix that into the soil. Now, eggshells also, the benefit of doing eggshells is that it can also help with soil drainage. So it's really good for the soil itself, not just the plant. When you add eggshells to the soil, it also protects the plants, if they're outdoor plants specifically, but it protects the plants from things like slugs and snails. So that's kind of another added bonus there. That calcium is important. A lot of plants need it. Plants like tomatoes, different peppers, eggplants, broccoli, cauliflower, chard, spinach. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's always a good rule of thumb or a good thing to have that extra, those eggshells to add that extra calcium. Now, how do we know when our plant needs more calcium? Some of the indicators are that the new leaves that are growing are going to be really pale, pale green. And the older leaves, the already established leaves, will start to curl up and brown around the edges. So you'll see those leaves kind of fade, the color fade. Now, one of the things I do want to mention, kind of pause for a second, is I'm not saying that we need to spend hours and hours in our gardens or looking at our plants. But I think it's important to kind of notice them and pay attention to them throughout the day. As you're walking by or you're in that area, take a look at them because you'll start noticing the more familiar you are with your plant, the faster you'll start to notice when a plant needs certain things. And so if you are paying attention, let's say you're growing your tomato plant, you're paying attention to it, you're noticing it throughout the day, right? Throughout the weeks. You'll start to notice if it needs calcium because you'll notice when those leaves start to pale, when they start to lose color. And then you can add those eggshells in. Now, one of the things that I want to mention too is when it comes to noticing some of these needs that our plant may have, there are a lot of similarities. So the nitrogen and calcium, for example, both of them will have faded color, right? You'll see pale green, pale color. So how do we know that the plant needs calcium or that the plant needs nitrogen? Well, it's paying attention to those other things. If you're just noticing a pale color, it could mean a variety of things. But what else are you noticing? Are you noticing that the leaves are smaller than usual? Or are you noticing that the leaves are kind of curling up some? And so noticing all of those things will kind of point us in the right direction. Okay. And so that's how we can tell, even though if your leaf starts turning pale, like getting pale in color, you'll be able to tell the difference, like what your plant needs, by noticing all the other things that your plant is telling you as well, whether it's small or curled up leaves. Okay? So anyway, going back to the calcium specifically, just crushing up those shells as small as you can get them and then adding them into that soil will enrich that soil and will help that plant, give that plant more calcium. And eggshells are pretty accessible, right? They're kind of pricey now. But generally, eggshells are pretty accessible. And so that's an easy thing to add to our plants. I will generally add like coffee grounds to just, the only plant that I usually put coffee grounds in are my ginger roots. But eggshells I'll add to a lot of plants because a lot of plants need it. And again, it's not just tomatoes. I've been bringing up tomatoes for both of these, but there are a lot of vegetables that can really benefit from that added calcium. The next one I want to kind of touch on is potassium. And so this one, potassium, an easy way to add potassium to your soil, to your plant, is using banana peels. I was about to say banana skins, banana peels. Bananas and banana peels are packed with potassium. And there are a lot of plants that need potassium, not just plants that are producing fruit, like tomatoes, but house plants too can really benefit from added potassium. And like I said, banana peels are the best, an easy way to get potassium into that soil, into your plant. And what you can do is just take those banana peels, put it in a little jar or pitcher of water for a few days, and then use that water to water your plants. That is an easy and quick way to add that potassium to the soil. Now, tomatoes and bell peppers definitely benefit from added potassium, but a lot of houseplants do as well. So things like philodendrons, pothos, snake plants, succulents, they can all benefit from that banana water. So not just vegetables, but other houseplants as well. So if you do eat a lot of bananas, definitely save those skins and make that banana water. Right? Or banana peels and make the banana water. So then the question to our next question, I guess, is how do we tell when our plant needs more potassium? Again, it's looking at those leaves. And the leaves will generally turn yellow or brown around the edges. So it's a little different from the yellowing that happens when a plant needs nitrogen. When a plant needs nitrogen, that yellowing, that pale green is kind of all over. But with potassium, it starts at the edges and works its way in. And so we can kind of see the difference in these two illustrations as well. Now, it won't be exactly like this, but that's a way to kind of notice it, right? Is it starting on the inside or is it starting on those edges and working their way in? So that's a kind of an indicator that our plant needs more potassium. Now, it doesn't hurt to water all your plants with that banana water. So like definitely keep that just kind of in the back of your mind too. That plants, a lot of plants need that extra potassium. So that banana water is a really great way to do that. And then the last one on this slide is magnesium. And this is something that we haven't talked about before in this series, adding magnesium to our plants. An easy way to add magnesium is using Epsom salt. And I'm specifically saying Epsom salt instead of like rock salt or table salt because there is a difference. Epsom salt is something I use often when I'm making like aromatherapy things. When I'm using like my herbs or flowers or essential oil, I'll use that Epsom salt to make bath salts or shower scrubs or things like that. The Epsom salt is good for us and it's good for our plants. And so using that Epsom salt, you don't need a lot, but mixing a little bit of that Epsom salt in with the soil around your plant can be really, really good for your plant. How do we know when our plant needs a little extra magnesium? The big indicator is that the veins of the leaves are going to start turning yellow and brown. So yellowing is a common indicator that your plant needs something. But paying close attention to where it's yellowing lets us know what exactly our plant needs. And so for magnesium, it's paying attention to those veins. The veins in the leaves, and again, this is a generic leaf illustration, but leaves across the board will be like that. Let's say, for example, we'll go back to the tomato. If you're growing the tomato and you notice your tomato leaf is yellowing, take a look at those veins inside and see if it is that it needs magnesium. Maybe it's yellowing from the outside and needs potassium, or yellowing all over. not the veins, but all over the leaf itself, then it may need nitrogen. So again, paying attention to those details will help point us in the right direction. But those yellowing veins, those browning veins, are a big indicator that we need to add a little extra Epsom salt to that soil. It's that our plant needs a little extra magnesium. The main plants that need extra magnesium, that like a lot of magnesium, again, are tomatoes. Basically, tomatoes need a lot, I think. They need a lot. It doesn't hurt to give tomatoes extra care for sure. But tomatoes, different peppers, potatoes, eggplants, beans, lettuces, radishes, they all could benefit from extra magnesium. I will also say that houseplants like magnesium as well. And so it doesn't hurt to every now and then add a little extra Epsom salt, to your soil for your houseplants, and that you can see a difference for sure. The last thing I want to say about magnesium is I don't have a lot of experience growing roses. I have family members who are very allergic to it, so I have no experience with roses. But I do know, I have heard from several people, gardeners, that roses love that Epsom salt in the soil. So if you are growing roses, keeping some Epsom salt on hand is generally a good idea. Yep. So these are just kind of the first four. I want to move on to some other needs too, like water and light. And I know that these can seem like obvious common sense ones, but I think it's important to kind of talk through some of it also. And so I know that some of us may have a hard time remembering to water on a regular basis or overwatering. That was a problem that I had, always overwatering. But there are some tips and things that we can do to kind of help our plants stay as hydrated as they need to be. Now, different plants require different amounts of water. So again, it's helpful to pay attention to those leaves, whatever type, whether it's a house plant or vegetables and herbs, whatever that is, paying attention to those leaves, again, is really helpful and can give us a lot of information. And so if your plant is dehydrated, if it's not getting enough water, it's definitely going to look droopy. And the leaves are going to start getting crunchy and really dry. And so if it's hard, which I know life can happen and schedules get busy, and so sometimes it's hard to remember to water. That's one of the things that we may forget about. I know I'm guilty of that for sure. But a solution, one that I use often, are water globes. And I don't know if anyone has seen those or uses them. If you have used them, then you know how beneficial they can be. But a water globe it's a spike, kind of like a tube that has a ball on the end. And so you fill it up with water, you stick it in the soil of your plant. And the benefit of using something like a water globe is that the plant will take the water it needs, and the rest of the water will stay in that globe, and it just kind of is right there. If that plant needs it, it can take some more. So that's an easy way to kind of keep your plants watered so they don't dry out constantly. And it's easier to pay attention to an empty globe sometimes than it is to pay attention to how dry the soil is. So those water globes are helpful. You can get really pretty glass ones, but I've also found some water globes at the Dollar Tree. So you can find them in a lot of places, and they really are helpful. On the opposite end of that spectrum, underwatering is an issue for sure, but so is overwatering. And as I said before, that's one that I have definitely been guilty of, overwatering plants. But there are a couple of ways to kind of prevent overwatering. And one of them, again, are those water globes, because the plant will take the water that they need and leave the rest. But another way to make sure we don't overwater is bottom watering. And this is basically another way that the plant takes the water it needs and not more than that. And so bottom watering is basically where you take a bowl or a tray with high sides and you put water in it, and then you take the whole plant in its pot and put it in that water. And then the plant soaks up from the bottom all the water it needs. It won't take long. As you do it, you'll be able to see that water level go down. It'll take that water quickly. And when you see that water level stay still, not go down anymore, then you know the plant has had enough water. So bottom watering is really helpful, especially if you are like me and you're heavy-handed with the amount of water that you use. Bottom watering is a great option. But some of the indicators that your plant is being overwatered is, again, you'll start to see yellow, you'll start to see drooping and wilty edges, but you'll also start to see things like rot. So that you'll start to see black spots maybe come in, or black stems. And that's an indicator that there's too much water. The soil is too saturated. The plant is just getting overwatered. So if you do find that your plant is overwatered, the best next step, like immediate next step, is to let it dry out completely before you water it again. And then use something like the bottom watering or the water globes. That's really helpful. And then the last one on this slide is all about light. So sometimes it's hard to tell the difference when your plant is overwatered just by looking at the leaves, if your plant is overwatered or if it just needs more light. So because they'll both kind of yellow, excuse me, and they'll both kind of get droopy. Right? The thing to really pay attention to, the big difference, is the moisture of the soil, but also those black spots and stems. That rot, that black is the indicator that it's too much water. If you're not seeing those, if the soil is like not overly saturated, then light is probably what that plant needs more. So there are a couple ways to remedy that. I will say even plants that are low light plants still need a lot of light. And so if you find your plant needs more light, of course, repositioning it, putting it in a windowsill or like in an area where it gets more direct light is a great solution. But one of the things that I've started using quite a bit recently and found incredibly helpful were plant lights. And I know that plant lights can be pricey. You can also find some pretty inexpensive plant lights as well. But plant lights can be really helpful. It can also feel a little overwhelming because there are so many plant light options out there. So it's hard to know which ones to do, right? So there are two main differences when it comes to plant lights. One is you can get a full spectrum plant light, which is generally what I do. Full spectrum plant light has all three lights. So it's the red, blue, and yellow. So if you're not sure, if it doesn't say full spectrum on the box, notice what types of lights are on there. So that red, blue, and yellow are the full spectrum lights. And that one's something that you can use. Is really good for vegetables, but it's also really good for houseplants or flowering plants as well. And then you have the light that's not full spectrum, that's kind of partial spectrum. And that one is better for like flowering plants. I like doing the full spectrum because you can kind of set it and forget it. When you do that partial spectrum plant light, you do have to kind of change that out and think about seasons as well. But full spectrum works really well. That's usually what I use. Full spectrum lights, now you can get them in a variety of looks. And like I said, they can be pricey and it can feel overwhelming when it comes to finding the right plant light for you. You can do plant lights that are clamp lights that you can just clamp on and turn on. There are halo lights that are ring lights that you can stick in your plant. And there are also like strip lights, plant lights, that you can fix to the ceiling or the top of a shelf. So there are a variety of lights out there. One of the things that I started doing when I was just getting into plant lights was getting like a regular clamp light and just buying a plant light bulb and sticking it in there. And that was a cheaper way to kind of experiment with plant lights, try it out. I will say the nice thing about getting a plant light is that most of them have timers on them, so you don't have to keep turning them on and off, which is really nice. And so they'll go on rotation. So they'll be like 8 hours on and 16 hours off, things like that. So that's really that's really nice. And I will say plant lights are incredibly helpful, but you can still grow well without plant lights, just making sure that you're getting the right amount of natural light. But if you don't have a lot of natural light that's coming into your space, or your yard is really shaded, then a plant light is really helpful and a good way to go. Yeah. And again, I just want to mention that paying attention to those leaves, like we've talked about a lot of a handful of different needs that a plant can have, and there are some overlaps in indicators, but just paying attention to your overall plant, noticing those details, those slight changes, will be a good indicator into the need of your plant. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And just want to kind of check in with everybody. I have other things that I want to kind of mention too, but I just want to check in really quickly if there are any questions that are coming up so far about these different needs and some of the indicators to look for.
Ruth, we have some questions going back to calcium.
Mhm.
Someone was wondering, since they don't eat eggs, if they could use a crushed up calcium pill that they take, or if that would be too concentrated.
Oh, that might be a little too concentrated. I'm not sure about calcium pills, vitamins. I think it's definitely better to use the eggshells if you can. But if you don't use eggs, I know there are other fertilizers that you can get in the store that'll be um, more loaded with calcium and focus more towards plants. Typically, um, calcium kind of fights against highly acidic soil. So there are certain plants that need a lot of acidity, right? Those are going to be things like the ginger and tomatoes. Now, tomatoes are something that I keep bringing up. Tomatoes need a lot. And tomatoes are one of the few plants that would do well with the eggshells and the coffee grounds. I think you want to be careful adding them at the same time. Kind of alternating is probably a better route. A lot of the acid-loving plants don't need that extra calcium. Tomatoes are the exception. Tomatoes are very needy plants.
While you're talking about tomatoes, we had a question asking if the older leaves on tomato plants naturally get yellow and die, or is that the sign that they need some added nutrients?
That's a really good question. So if you start noticing majority of the leaves turning yellow, then that's definitely a need that the plant has. Now, if you have just like when you're growing tomatoes specifically, you'll notice that the bottom leaves will start to yellow, they'll start to die off, especially as the plant gets bigger. And that's natural. That's not really that the plant needs anything, but if you start noticing that yellowing all throughout your plant, then that's an indicator that it's in need of something. That's a really good question.
Another person was asking, they're growing their bamboo in a cup of water, and they were curious about yellow leaves on that plant and what would be the solution, which made me think a great question would be if you're growing something in water in a hydroponic way, how can you add these nutrients?
That's really good. Really good question. So when you are growing in like a hydroponic garden, you have plant food that you add to that water on a regular basis. That plant food is going to be loaded with all the nutrients that the plant needs, right? And so if you're doing something in a hydroponic garden, you don't have to worry about adding extra things because you have those plant foods. Now, if you're growing something in a jar, let's say we are rooting something or regrowing herbs, then like it's a little harder. You don't really have plant food that you're adding to it. But one of the things that you can do is specifically with herbs is add that clean water on a regular basis. So every couple of weeks, adding in new water, dumping out the old water, adding in new water is helpful. And that's just for herbs. Now, if you're doing something like regrowing vegetables, like we talked about several months ago now, regrowing vegetables, when you're doing it with water, you're starting that growth. So you're starting that rooting process. When that vegetable gets to a certain height, then you want to plant it in soil, and that's when you can start adding those extra nutrients. But herbs are okay in the water to grow pretty consistently in the water, and then you can transfer them to soil if you want. But those vegetables, you are just starting them out in the water and then transferring them to soil.
Awesome. Another question, let's see. Oh, someone was asking about boiled potato water. They heard that that could be good for plants. I did a little bit of research and it seems like it's good for potassium, but you don't want to use it hot or with salt in it. But if you have experience you'd like to share.
For sure. So I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, we talked about in our garden hacks. So we do have a handout about that that talks about potato water, but also rice water and vegetable water and pasta water. Those are all really great for plants. You can water consistently with that. And those are loaded with things like the nitrogen and calcium and phosphorus and magnesium. They do have a lot of nutrients for your plants. But just as Laura was saying, you want to make sure you're not salting that water as you're boiling your plants or pasta or rice or whatever. Because if you do add that table salt to it, it's not going to be good for your plant. One of the things that I also want to talk about, we're talking about things that you possibly have around the house, like coffee grounds and eggshells and things like that. But I also, even though I use those in my gardening, I also use fertilizer spikes. I know that there are a lot of different fertilizers that you can buy in like garden stores and nurseries that are helpful to plants if you want to go that route. And I would definitely say there are some really great ones out there too. If you have experience, definitely let us know. But there are other fertilizers that you can purchase that are like liquid fertilizers that you dilute with water and add to your plant. But there's also fertilizer spikes that I found really helpful because it's just a small green spike that you can just like stick in the soil and um, and it helps fertilize the plant. So even if you are dealing with certain like other issues like sticky leaves or things like that, those fertilizer spikes can be really helpful.
There were a couple questions that were specific to certain plants, and I just wanted to give the answer I was giving in the chat out loud, which is that while I could find some examples for specific plants, like lemongrass needs nitrogen and lime trees also need nitrogen and magnesium, the best thing to do is to take a look at your plant leaves, as Ruth has been teaching us, to see what they might need. So if you want to add to that, but also the next question is about water globes, and are they okay for every plant, or are there some that shouldn't have the soil constantly wet, some that need to dry out in between?
That's true. So things like succulents and things like orchids, they're not going to need a whole lot of water. They like really dry soil. And so those water globes may not be the best solution for that, but I have water globes in so many different things. And it's not that it keeps the soil completely moist, it's that it gives the soil the opportunity to take the water it needs. Because in that globe, you'll notice if you use those globes that the water will stay in there for a long amount of time. It doesn't all come out at one time, so it's the soil gradually pulling that water out. So it's very similar to bottom watering in that way, that the soil is only going to take what it needs. With the water globes, I've found you don't have to worry about things like over watering. Now, if you do, like I said, if you do find that your plant has been overwatered, it's starting to get that wilty and that yellow, and you're starting to see some of the signs of rot, you definitely want to dry out your plant. Stay away from watering it for a while and put it in kind of sun, like more direct light so it can dry out pretty quickly. And then start again with that bottom watering or like those globes. Those can be really helpful. Yeah.
We have a question that I think is referring to the waters from our garden hack session, the ones where we're doing the banana peel water or something like that. Um, do those keep for a while? Can they get moldy?
Very good question. So if you are making water, not making water, but like making the infused water, we'll say, that is not going to save for a while. So you'll want to use it pretty quickly. And if you're not using it, like take a couple days at the most, store it in the fridge so it kind of slows down that growth. I would say, especially with the banana water, you want to infuse it for a couple days. I will generally stick the banana peels in the water and then stick it in the fridge for a couple days because that does slow it down, that aging down, so you can use it. It does need to infuse for a little while before you pour it into. But I will also say if you make compost, like you mix a whole bunch of things in compost. The banana peels, you don't have to use banana water if you're using those banana peels in that compost. Because the compost is a mix of a whole bunch of things that can provide all those nutrients that the plant needs. We're talking about today, we're just focusing on like specific needs that you're seeing in your plant. Like if it needs extra calcium or extra potassium, these are some of the things that you can do to help it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there was a follow-up question to that as well, actually, which is, can the soil get moldy if you put the banana water on it?
Ew, very good question. So if you are over watering, then yes, for sure. If it has too much water, if it's too saturated, you can see like it'll start molding. I will say things like root rot happen when soil is oversaturated. So if you are doing like a hydroponic garden, or if you're regrowing or rooting things in water, you don't have to worry about root rot. And I know that feels weird because it's in water, but root rot is caused by oversaturated soil. So it's like clumped in and like suffocating the roots. And so that mold will come if it's oversaturated. One thing that helps if you find that like you may be having some issues with watering too much or not watering enough, or if you're using something like banana water or pasta water and you're seeing like the little gnats or flies come in, one of the things that I have done is use like little pebbles or rocks on top of the soil that kind of protects the soil from other bugs that may come too. So doing a layer of that can really help with like tiny flies and things like that that may come too.
Awesome. And then the last question I have for now is, can you use the Epsom salt bath water? Can you save some of that to water your plants that need magnesium?
That's an interesting question. I My first instinct is to say no, but I don't really have a reason. My thinking in saying no is that if you're using bath water, you're also getting your own like oils and skin in that bath water. And a lot of times when you're using Epsom salt specifically for bath, that Epsom salt has essential oils in it, which would not generally be the best thing for plants. So getting just a regular Epsom salt that has no additives or anything to it is going to be better for your plants than using something because the bath water also, like if we use soaps or things like that, it kind of mixes in with that water. So that that is my like instinct to say with that. Um, but if anyone has any experience with that, definitely let us know.
I'll add that if you are taking a bath with Epsom salts and you put the Epsom salt in first, you might be able to just save out a cup of the water before you go in. And that would be a good way to not waste Epsom salt on your plant if that's your concern. And then we just had a question that says, what about wiping the dust off of the leaves? I'm curious if there are advantages or disadvantages to taking that dust off.
Yes. Oh, so good. Yes, you want to take the dust off your leaves. And that's because dust, when it collects to or collects on your leaves, it blocks the light from getting through those leaves, right? It can build up. And so it's not good for your plant. So if you want to dust off your leaves or wipe them off, that is a good route, a good thing to do. I know they make special like I don't know if I have it with me, but I have like a little wooden, it looks like a set of tongs. And on the inside it has like this terry cloth material that I can use to kind of wipe off some leaves. But you can use just a regular like moist towel or paper towel or duster or like anything to dust that off is good. Speaking of leaves, how are we on time? We have a few minutes. Speaking of leaves and cleaning off leaves. There are a couple things that I do want to mention about our leaves um, that it's helpful to kind of wipe off or clean. So, for example, you may find that your leaves, you may start to notice that they're kind of graying a little bit. And if you start to notice that graying, that's generally a sign that they need more than just calcium or just nitrogen. They need more things. So if it's starting to gray, then it's a good idea to go to a fertilizer because there are a lot of things that it's missing in the soil. So if you do notice the graying, I just want to say that too. But if you notice, like on your leaves, you may notice that there's little white fuzz that's starting to appear. That white fuzz is generally mealybugs, which is not good for our plants. So if you see that little white fuzz on your leaf, you want to take like a cotton swab or a cotton ball and kind of wipe that off, and then use something like an insecticidal soap, which I know sounds really weird, but the soap that I use is really pure Castile soap. I have super sensitive skin, so there's not a lot of like soaps that I can use, and Castile soap is one that I can use that doesn't break my skin out. But it's a really great one to use for leaves if you do see those mealy bugs. And a lot of times, what people will do is mix some of that insecticidal soap, that Castile soap, with like a cooking oil, and use that to kind of spray on your leaves, and it helps kind of get rid of those mealybugs and protect it. I will say if you start to notice the mealybugs on your leaves, you want to pull that plant away from all your other plants because that will transfer, and you don't want to have like a huge infestation, right? So my recipe for making an insecticidal spray for things like mealybugs or aphids and spider mites, that's if like your leaves get kind of sticky. Sometimes that's an indicator of those aphids or spider mites. And this insecticidal soap will work for that. But generally what I'll do is mix about a tablespoon of the soap with about a cup of cooking oil and mix that really well. And then use about a teaspoon or two of that with a gallon of water. And then that's kind of what I use for like dealing with mealybugs or aphids, things like that. And you'll spray it, and then a few days later, go and spray it again. And you have to do that probably a couple times, but it'll help protect your plant from further damage and stop the plant from or stop those pests from going to other plants as well. So there are certain things, certain plants that don't do well with insecticidal soap, and those are going to be things like some flowers, like I think impatiens and geraniums and begonias, like those type of flowering plants. But generally for like garden plants, herbs, or other house plants, not the flowering ones, but other house plants, this ratio works really well. So again, like the recipe that I use is about 1 tablespoon of the Castile soap with 1 cup of cooking oil. Mix that together, and then use about a teaspoon of 2 of that with a gallon of water. You want to kind of have it diluted. You don't want a huge concentration of that, but diluted enough that you can reapply it a few times. Yeah. That was like a little tangent, but since we were talking about leaves, that's that's helpful sometimes, I think.
Perfect. Then I'll have you on one more tangent. Someone was asking about neem oil, and I think you can answer quicker than I can type.
Neem oil. So neem oil is really good. It's different than the Castile soap, than that insecticidal soap. And so it's not going to do the same thing that the insecticidal soap will do. And other soaps don't work in the same way. I know a few months ago, we talked about using something like dish soap to help with pests. And dish soap works really well for things like mites and beetles and whiteflies and stuff like that. It also works to add with the vegetable oil for things like mites, like the same stuff. It's different though from the insecticidal soap that's really helpful for things like the mealy bugs, the aphids, and the spider mites. That insecticidal soap mixed with the oil is definitely a better route than the neem oil. The neem oil works for other things, but that insecticidal soap is best for those. And I think those three are probably the most common things you'll see with indoor plants, if that makes sense. Castile soap, you can find in a lot of places. You're actually going to see it in like the hand soap aisle or like the bath aisle, like where you get like body washes and stuff like that. That's where you'll find Castile soap. I've also seen Castile soap at like a Trader Joe's, and I think at like, yeah, Walgreens and Target. Yeah. So Castile soap is somewhat easy to get your hands onto, especially if you do have issues with that white fuzz or those sticky leaves. Having some of that Castile soap on hand can be really helpful. And one of the things I also want to mention is that we've got some new garden facilitators that have joined our team. And so starting next month, starting July, one of them, Alexis, is going to be doing several really good garden groups. One is going to be focused on herbalism, which will be really exciting. One is on the best type of gardening for you. So she'll be going over a variety of garden types and talking about some of the pros and cons of each. So that'll be really helpful. And she's also doing a couple series on container gardening for indoors and container gardening for outdoors. So if you are interested in any of those, definitely check out our programs page Challenge and sign up for those. She is amazing, and these groups are going to be so good. So definitely keep an eye out for that. We'll still be offering this series at the end of the month. And then if you're interested in being a part, if you're in Illinois and interested in being part of our hydroponic garden series, definitely check those out as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I know it was a whole lot of information we kind of talked about, but hopefully it was helpful and not overwhelming. But again, if there are any questions, always feel free to reach out. We like questions. There's no bad question or wrong question. All questions are welcome. And I am definitely looking forward to being back with everyone next month. So have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. Happy gardening. And we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.